So welcome to Looking Back, Looking Around, and Looking Forward, the ecosystem approach to education. We are thrilled to have you here. My name is Kim Igwe, and I am the Professional Learning Manager here at Branch Ed. I will briefly share Branch Ed's commitment and a little bit about us before we get started. So Branch Ed, our commitment is to achieve sustainable programmatic transformation leading to improved outcomes for diverse educators who, by extension, benefit all students by preparing them to thrive in our heterogeneous society. We believe that every student deserves access to caring, adaptive, and well-prepared teachers, that every teacher deserves preparation that fuses quality with diversity, and that every person benefits when we create a higher standard of education together. Thank you for joining us. We would love to know a little bit more about you. If you haven't already, please share your name in the chat where you're joining from. And in a moment, you're going to see a poll so we can learn a little bit more about your role and what brings you here today. So if you can just briefly answer the poll that's popped up on your screen. Great. I see some higher education administrators, some faculty, some other organizations. Thank you all for being here today. Great. It's always great to know who's in the room. Great to see you. Beth from Georgia, April from Texas. Perfect. A little bit about Branch Ed's educational ecosystem approach. So this is the first of the Branch Ed's 2023-2024 Nuts and Bolts webinar series. The series will focus on the educational ecosystem. At Branch Ed, we believe transforming education happens within an educational ecosystem in which there is a strong connection and collaboration between and among stakeholders to ensure all children have the support they need to thrive. This ecosystem includes, but is not limited to, children, families, caregivers, community organizations, healthcare systems, local education agencies, post-secondary education providers, industry business partners, and government agencies. These stakeholders have unique and complementary roles that converge and diverge to benefit all children by preparing them to thrive in our heterogeneous society. So a little bit about housekeeping. We are recording this webinar and it will be available on our resource portal and in a follow-up email. In addition, we are also live streaming it on LinkedIn and we will share any resources or links in the chat. Please use the chat if you have any technical issues. Thank you in advance to our Branch Ed staff who's helping with the chat. And if you have questions, we will have time at the end to address those questions. So please use the Q&A feature to ask any questions you have throughout the webinar. And now I'd love to introduce our panelists. With us today, we have Dr. Ira Murray. He is the Associate Director of Research and Development at the Vanderbilt University Initiative for Race, Research, and Justice, where he oversees the research portfolio, grants, and partnerships. Prior to this role, Dr. Murray was the President and Chief Executive Officer of United Way of the Capital Area in Jackson, Mississippi. At both Vanderbilt University and United Way, he has led equity-focused research and strategic planning efforts, including helping to craft United Way's network, equity, strategy, and framework. His current work focuses on developing deeper knowledge and understanding of the role of race, equity, in the decision-making of educators inside and outside of school. Thank you for being here today, Dr. Murray. Coach Jermar Rountree is a health and physical education teacher at Center City Public Charter School at the Brightwood campus. He also serves as the athletic director and the district teacher lead for the physical education and health department. Jermar was named the 2023 Washington D.C. Teacher of the Year and was one of the 5 finalists for National Teacher of the Year, and is the 2023 National Alliance Public Charter Changemaker. Jermar believes that physical movement can be leveraged to increase academic performance and engagement, and learning about mental and emotional health is as important as core subjects. He thrives on connecting with students to the community through partnerships and has established in school, after school, and weekend partnerships with organizations to help kids grow in all facets of life. Thank you for being here, Coach. Mr. Kurt Russell is a veteran teacher at Oberlin High School in the Oberlin City Schools districts who believes education can transform students' lives. For the past 25 years, Russell has included cultural relevance in the curriculum for the 9th through 12th grade classes he teaches. African American history, US history, IB history of the Americas, and race, gender, and oppression. Russell received the 2022 National Teacher of the Year and the Teacher of the Year awards from the Oberlin Heritage Center and the Oberlin chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. In addition to teaching history classes, Russell also serves as the lead teacher at Oberlin High School and advisor for the Black Student Union, Student Council, and Junior Class. Thank you for being here, Mr. Russell. Before we begin our discussion, I would love to hear from our audience on what you're hoping to get out of today's webinar. So in the chat, if you could share what you're hoping, what brought you here and what you're hoping to get out of today's webinar. And with that, we are going to start our conversation. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. To start, I'd like to discuss more broadly the topic of the series. So the importance of an ecosystems approach to teacher preparation that includes communities and caregivers. Kurt, can you speak more to who we should be thinking about in this approach? Who are the stakeholders to consider?
First of all, thank you so much for having me, and it's an honor to be on this panel with Dr. Murray and Mr. Rountree. I think the first thing that we really need to examine is that education does not live in silos, right? And so it is truly this ecosystem of a learning approach. And the benefit of that is collaboration, is a growth mindset, is cultural relevance that goes along building this ecosystem. And so it's more than just teachers, it's more than just students. Our stakeholders within education is multifaceted. And so it's our community centers, it's our churches, our temples, our mosques, it's our nonprofit organization. Each one of these stakeholders play a major part in really elevating young learners, making sure that equity is being provided, making sure that collaboration, as I mentioned before, is being sustained and that is being relevant. And so the stakeholders in this system, as I said, is really broad. Everyone from parents to students, but also let's not forget our businesses. Let's not forget our nonprofit organizations. Let's not forget our tech corporations within our towns and cities. And that's so important for us to remember and to remind ourselves of that in order for us to grow.
Coach Ira, anything to add with the ecosystem of folks you're thinking of that are part of that ecosystem?
Yeah, so I'll jump in. So I think I agree with everything Kurt just said. And I think about, when I think about the educational ecosystem, I immediately go to like ecological systems theory and child development theory, right? And how these different ways of viewing the ecosystem kind of overlap with one another. And it really makes me think about, who are the stakeholders who are the most salient figures in a child's life, depending on where a child is in their stages of development, right? So when we think about all of the different levels of systems, right? Bronfenbrenner talks about micro and meso and macro systems, exosystems, right? When we think about the different players involved at each one of those levels, how does that manifest itself? How does that play out in a child's life, right? Depending on whether they're, in later childhood or they're in adolescence or they're in early adulthood, what really is going to resonate, right? And so thinking about schools, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school, how do we put together groups of stakeholders and bring them, engage them with the school and with the students and the teachers in that school, based on, where the students are, right? And so like the younger children, we think about, we think about family and church and places like that as kind of really being the more salient, influences in their lives. But then when they hit adolescence, it's more about their peer groups and things like that, right? And they start getting to high school, they start thinking about their future selves and what does that look like? And so, creating these stakeholder groups that are working not just with students, but also, with pre-service teachers and in-service teachers and administrators as well, that really can resonate with the kids at where they are at their points of life. I think it's really critical to think about. So, to Kurt's point, it's not really a one size fits all. When we think about it, the educational ecosystem is so large that I think sometimes it's very easy to get lost in it. But when we start really pinpointing, what students need at that point in their lives, it helps us really think about those folks we really need to be engaging in that period of time.
And I think it's so important, as Dr. Murray mentioned, that when we look at this ecosystem, it's those entities that influence our young learners. And I don't think that we should misinterpret that. It has to be some type of influence, hopefully for the good, in order for our young people to strive and to grow. So Dr. Murray, thank you for mentioning and reminding us of those influences that is a part of our young people's lives. And that creates this system as well.
I could easily just jump on there and say ditto to both of you, because I think that's what it's going to be like for the next part of our conversation. Dr. Murray, you talked about, pinpointing and really making it more of a finite situation when we're talking about individuals. And I think we're talking about the concept of elevation, right? And now more than ever, we need to really think about, one, those individuals who are really pushing our students to be better than themselves than they are right now, right? Thinking about those teachers, but also making sure that those teachers feel the same way that we're trying to make our students feel. I think we've kind of lost that value after the pandemic. So the year after the pandemic, there was an elevation of educators, right? Everyone was like, educators are so great, we do so much. They knew what we did. And then all of a sudden, everyone forgot. They forgot what we still continue to do day in and day out. And I think we're talking about an elevation piece that needs to continue to happen, and it needs to grow in the minds of individuals who are making those calls and developing those policies that we on the bottom of the totem pole have to follow, right? That we have to abide by, those different policies that we have to adhere to. That shifts sometimes that ecosystem, that kind of changes the way that we interact with our students. And if we're talking about elevation and the teachers that are going beyond and above and beyond, we need to make sure that they are highlighted, not just one time, but often, and together, and to keep that coalition of individuals who are continuing to push our students beyond, to stay in that limelight and not to be forgotten.
Mr. Rountree, thank you for that. And that is so true, that we need to highlight the importance and the expertise of our educators. And let's elevate and give voices to our students as well. A lot of times we forget that students are a major part of this ecosystem, and we need to hear from our students more and more each day.
There's a lot coming in on the chat, but this one seems to flow into this question, so I'm going to ask it, which is, often these resources are untapped. And for teacher candidates, new teachers, we've named a lot of the pieces of the ecosystem. How do we ensure we're leveraging those resources within the ecosystem? And in reading your bios, you all are part of your community. And so being in the thread of the community really I am assuming helps, right, in a way to know what's there, but would love to hear from you all. What advice, how can we leverage these resources that are oftentimes on tap?
I think for me, I'm always, this whole journey that I've been on has just opened my eyes to how many resources are out there. And I myself, I'm still trying to navigate it, right? And how do I not only navigate this successfully so that it's brought to my students and I can advance my students and have engaging lessons and so on and so forth, but also how do I bring another person into the fold? And I think that's what we have to continue to do. When I hear about something new or I see something that's really interesting and it's not even my subject matter, I'm on the phone or I'm texting someone or I'm like sending an email, because I want them to have this resource and I want them to have it now before I forget about it. But I also want to, bring a friend. Every time this happens, every time I see a resource, I want individuals to bring someone along so that we can start filtering out these resources that are so many out there that we don't even know.
And that's part of that ecosystem, is that, we build these communities of educators, we build this community of learners, and that's how we spread the message, and that's how we leverage resources by allowing what Mr. Rountree just said, where maybe we identify those stakeholders and we identify the resources that stakeholders might have and could bring to our schools and to our learners, and then we share it out. And I think that's the best way to do it, but we all have to be connected. And as I said earlier, we can't live in our little silos and live in our own little bubble. We have to share, and that's part of education, is the aspect of sharing.
Yeah, and I'll jump in on this too. I'll put my old United Way hat on for a minute, but we've been in my previous life. I was involved in several collective impact kind of designs, initiatives to work directly with schools, with school districts, and with community partners, right? Multi-sector partnerships. And one of the things that we did was when we formed these initiatives, we would meet regularly with folks that are in the school, right? In addition to district administration, so the teachers, administrators, and also folks in the district office. And those conversations would be different depending on the group, but what really resonated was it helped us understand on our end what was going on the ground in schools, because oftentimes I think we, as folks outside of schools, really think we understand what happens day to day, but unless you're there or you're talking to folks regularly, you really don't have a clue, right? Because kids are evolved so fast, from every class year to year is so different, right? And as soon as you think you've caught up, you realize you're about 3 years behind, right? And so being able to have those conversations regularly really helped us on our end figure out how we could leverage our resources. But it also helped, I think, on the schools end, realize not just what's available, but how do we talk to folks strategically, framing what we're trying to do strategically in a way that helps stakeholders see the pathway, right? To really see what that theory of change is and how we, as folks outside of the school, can leverage our resources to help advance that theory, right? And so, traditionally, you see adopt a school programs, you see after school, providers come into the school to offer programming that's enrichment and supportive. But usually that's just kind of the tipping point. I mean, that's the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that we can do as United Way. One of the things that we found was our relationships with others really kind of helped us serve as a conduit for the school, because everyone in the school is so busy. Rarely does the school have a person who their full-time job is to wake up every day thinking about community partnerships. And so it became up to us to really kind of fill that gap, and then use the relationships that we have existing to bring those resources to the schools. And also explain to our partners why the school needs this, and why this particular school is unique from this other particular school, even though you might think of their students as being of the same demographic. And so that's why I think these partnerships are really, really crucial, because we all have blind spots. And, I come from a family of teachers, so I know, the demands that teachers have every day, right? And sometimes thinking about the outside of school partnerships, is kind of a luxury to a lot of teachers, because they're so busy. And so, you can have partners who can take that burden off of you, but still be engaged on the strategy side, on the vision side, really understanding what we're trying to accomplish as a community and as an ecosystem. It really goes a long way to helping advance the work.
And I think it's also important for us to analyze data. I think we have to be data driven, because if there's many resources out there, some resources might not be beneficial to that community and to that school district. So in regards to leveraging resources, are the resources benefiting our kids, or are they just resources? And I think we are in the business of making sure that our resources are beneficial and impactful to our student learners. So let's get into making sure that we really take a dive into data collection and making sure that what we are providing our school districts are beneficial and impactful.
This is leading us to our next question, which is all around sustainability, because burnout is real for right now culturally, right? But definitely in the education sphere. So in order for an ecosystem to thrive, it needs to be sustainable for every member involved. And so we've started talking about this, but can you share a little bit more about how you think about sustainability within an educational ecosystem? Coach Rountree, if you could start us off.
I'd love to. Thank you. When I think about sustainability in an ecosystem that we are, if we let our dreams run wild, to be able to make that work, it's everything that we're talking about. It's making sure that not only do we have community partners that are coming in from outside that's actually reaching out to school systems, because we know that teachers are so tired, but also there is a person that is there that's reaching out to other community partners to make sure that our ecosystem works, that our ecosystem is getting all the things they need for not only for our students, not only for our staff, but also our families. I think we forget a lot about the importance it is for our families to understand what's going on in the school system, but not only to understand, but to make sure that they have translators, to make sure that the homework that goes home to kids can also be something that parents can also understand. So having programs for parents in the school system so that they can learn the curriculum that their kids are being taught. So it's all of those pieces that are being navigated together so that not only are our families on track, but our schools on track, our administrators are on track. So those regular meetings that you talked about earlier is something that not only broadens the horizon of those who are not on the ground, but it also gives an insight in that feel of support that teachers need to feel so that they can, that the school culture feels like warming and it feels inviting and it feels as if they can ask questions, and or if they have something they want to say and they can speak up and say they can do that without having any repercussions, or they can speak the truth when they really want to speak the truth, or something as simple as just taking a day off without feeling like they can't take a day off. And so creating that kind of school culture that gives everybody an opportunity to have a voice, right? We talked about that earlier, to make sure not only do our students have a voice, but our teachers have a voice, our families have a voice, and that our administrators, as well as their voices the loudest, they also hear our voices and take those into consideration.
Mr. Rountree, I totally agree with that. And especially for Black men educators, the burnout rate is really high. And Black men are leaving the profession at a higher rate than any other demographic group. And I think because what Mr. Rountree just mentioned is how some Black men feel as though they are not being elevated or their voices are not being heard. And that's one thing that we have to do better in this system, is making sure that every single educator in front of a child feel respected, feel as though that they are the expert in the classroom. And Dr. Murray mentioned this earlier when he said that for those individuals who are not in the school on a daily basis, really do not know what's going on. And I think the reliance on educators is really important to keep educators engaged, especially to keep Black men in the classrooms and in education.
Yeah, and I'll just add to everything that was just said. I think the key word that Mr. Rountree said was culture. Culture is what makes everything sustainable. right? Culture is that one aspect that, can withstand time, it can withstand external forces, internal threats. That's what people typically fall back on when there's uncertainty, or when there's stress, or when there's traumatic events, or even just understanding the world and making sense of what's going on, and forming belief systems and values. And so the culture of not just the school, which is at the center of this, but also those within the school, and the culture of the engagement with the partners is really crucial, because as Mr. Russell just said, turnover is a big deal. I live in Tennessee, and we've got teacher turnover like crazy right now, right? And so how do you sustain these partnerships when leadership is changing every couple of years, or when the teacher who was the lead teacher for this partnership has now taken another position somewhere else, or moved out of the district altogether, right? And culture is that piece that's going to be able to sustain that. And so establishing that culture at the very beginning of any type of initiative, whether it's a collective impact design or anything that deals with various stakeholders, is crucial. Having that shared vision, that shared communication, data, people clearly understanding their roles, and being able to see their contributions. And I think from an outside perspective looking in, sometimes as community partners, we make contributions to schools and we don't always see them. We don't always see the results. We don't always hear about the impact. And, that can cause burnout on the partner side as well, right? When you're not seeing that. And so being able to continuously have that communication where you're seeing how what you're contributing is impacting helps to keep you motivated, helps to keep you a part of that particular initiative. And that's something that we all, play a part in. So, I think this is really about making sure that, we have a culture in the partnerships where everyone understands the role that they play, the bigger vision, and we know who and what entities are responsible for what.
This gets a bit to the next question, which is around stakeholders' various vantage points and points of interaction. And would love to hear, Ira, you share a little bit more of the implication this has on students. So you started it. I'd love to hear you continue to share, like, what does that interaction then have on the students, on the PK through 12 students?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, I mentioned some ecological systems theory, not to go too, deep into the woods on this, but, I do think layering systems theory on top of childhood and human development is really key, right? So thinking about, how young people, particularly, younger students, interact with each one of these systems and these levels, and how those systems interact with one another is really key. Because that's really going to be the implications for that particular child, or that group of children, is, how are we and what level are we interacting with them on, and what's really more salient to them at that point in time. So I'll give you an example. If we're working with young children, I have a 6-year-old first grader, right? This is my only child, so everything is new for me, right? This whole schooling thing. And just knowing, just seeing how, the school is really targeting, because we live in a very diverse area. Her elementary school is one of the most diverse schools in our area in Nashville. It is very ethnically diverse, culturally diverse, religiously diverse, and racially diverse. They speak over a dozen different languages in her school. And she has classmates from all over the world. Her best friend is from South America and barely speaks English, right? Like, that's the kind of school she goes to. And so I'm always paying attention to who the school is inviting in, because that tells me a lot about, one, what the focus of the school is, what the culture of the school is, and also it gives me an indication what gaps might be there, right? So they're very good at inviting in partners who represent the students that are in the school, right? So immigrant organizations, non-English speaking groups, right? African-American churches, white churches. There are all these different types of groups that come in that are invited in because they reflect the students that are in the school. And so when I think about, the systems approach, I'm thinking about, for every individual school or clusters of school, feeder patterns, et cetera, what are we identifying the right partners at each one of those systems that can speak to children and what they're experiencing, right? So at the micro level, are we inviting in how are we defining family? What adults are we bringing into the space, right? Is it just the parents and caregivers? Or is it extended family as well? Because we know a lot of young children, particularly from immigrant families, rely on extended family, right? So are they part of who we're engaging and inviting in? Are the churches and the religious organizations that we're inviting into the schools? Do they represent the diverse religions of the students in the school, right? So that students don't feel left out, so that they see themselves in the folks and the adults who are coming into the school. When I think about, the EXO system, right? The social services, are the social service organizations we bringing in accessible to the students, right? Do they speak? Can they translate? Can they speak multiple languages? Do they, are their practices culturally relevant, culturally responsive, right? And culturally sustained, right? When we think about the different industries that we're bringing in terms of jobs, right? In terms of, helping with career preparation, particularly for older kids, does it represent a diversity of the interests of the students? Are we funneling them into certain types of careers that they may or may not be interested in, right? So taking all these things into example, and then thinking about how they interact with each other, right? And all that creates the type of experience that young people are going to have. And a lot of times it determines whether or not young people check in or check out, particularly in that middle school range where they're going through that adolescent development period where, their major influence begins to shift from family and caregivers to peers in terms of how they're forming their identity. Are we taking advantage of that? Are we really attuning our engagement with that, right? Are we using peer-to-peer interactions and engagements more than just the adults from the outside or the families or the caregivers and whatnot, right? So really understanding how all of that layers and laps on to one another is really key. And then so, it does pose a few questions, right? What does this mean for different levels of schooling, different stages of development, and how we account for the lived experiences and the vicarious experiences of the different students that are in the school? And it essentially points to we have to have different students. We have different students in different contexts at different stages of their lives, and they need different support within their ecosystems. And so we have to be in tuned and adaptable enough to really understand what is needed at the time of development and really focus our efforts on that so that we can have the greatest impact on the students and also do the least amount of harm, because we also need to understand culturally what the students are bringing to school.
Sorry about that. Students just came in. So just to add to that, and to really pinpoint some of the pieces that Dr. Ira Dr. Murray was pointing out. Voice advocacy for our students, right? Our students need to be a heavy voice in what is happening in the culture in our school. And I think that is one piece that we sometimes forget can be the most important piece to turn in the culture in your school. And you brought up some really good points around when you bring in partners, how it shifts the culture of the whole school and how it kind of lives up to the expectation that students, will do this at this certain age. For example, I have a partnership that comes into the school and has been in the school since I become to the school. So for about 8 years now. And the students now know what this organization represents. They've gone through a bunch of different phases, and now the families expect it. And so now the families expect this organization to be there, right? The organization has now expanded and it has brought so much information to families to help them grow as a whole family, but also in the school culture. They've grown so much. And so that partnership is really been a huge part in the culture of what our school has become. And so thinking about how partnerships not only become a really strong asset for the way that the culture is shaped in your school, but also becomes a partnership for families, right? And so I also thought when you started talking around how now this organization only work with middle school, but we're bringing them in for our back to school night so they can talk to the fifth graders, right? And so now we're building into a different grade level so that we are prepping them for what they will get next year so that families are already aware of what they're going to receive and can start asking questions. And so now families feel more secure when they go into health programs that they have already asked the questions and there's no stone left unturned, and that questions or their questions that they once had have already been answered. And so the flow of your school year now opens up for more engagement, more conversation, more discussions that students will gain more knowledge from. And so I love that idea of when partnerships come in, how it changes the culture, but it not only changes the culture, but it makes the culture that much more sound when everyone's working together in that ecosystem.
And I keep hearing the same theme over and over again from Mr. Rountree and Dr. Murray is culture, right? Bringing in the culture, whether those programming coming into the school or the school itself. And how do we continue to build upon this system? Is culture, is it a good fit? Is it beneficial for our communities? Because once again, this ecosystem is a community-based ideal. And you have to make sure that the culture of both entities, whether it's the community or whether it's the school, whatever the case may be, do they fit together, hand in the glove? Or is it a separate idea for both? And hopefully it will fit with one another. So I keep hearing the same comments, culture, 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 which I totally agree with.
Yeah, I'll add to that too. So when I was in Pittsburgh, we worked with a local high school there. We had a program where we took undergraduates who were interested in potentially going into an education career, particularly, middle school or high school. We had about a dozen of them. And we created a program with our local partners high school. It was actually a 6 through 12 school, where they mentored. They went in and they were mentors and tutors for the students throughout the entire school year, because we wanted to create a teacher preparation program that focused and centered a little bit less on the nuts and bolts of teaching and a little bit more on relationship building and understanding students and the social context and the school context in which students are learning, right? And so we had this program, and what was great about, and the reason this connects to what we're talking about is the culture of the school was such that it was an historic African-American community in Pittsburgh, and the culture of the school was such that they brought in partners all the time, right? And this was partners who provided what you might consider conventional types of services, tutoring, after school enrichment, things like that, with, some of the things that are a little bit non-traditional for a school sometimes, which you're talking about, bringing in, mental health professionals who focus on an African-centered type of, mental health interventions, bringing in folks who organizations who are cultural organizations, right? In addition to the education, where it really became salient for me, or really hit home for me, was there was an incident in school where there was a huge fight. And it's about between 2 and 3 dozen girls involved right after spring break. And it had been brewing really the entire spring break. And when they got back to school, it all came to a head. And so, when this fight happened, part of the immediate response, from the school was we have to get more, we have to become more like a prison, basically, and not in those words, but essentially that's what happened. So we need more cameras, we need more metal detectors, even though there were no weapons involved, things like that, right? But where the culture part really kicked in was they also said, but that's not enough, right? We really need to get our community partners in here who can work with these girls to figure out what's the underlying issue going on, work with these girls and mentor these girls so we don't have something like this happen again. We can really get down to the point. right? And so having those partners come in, they really were, the school itself was able to really better understand what brought that situation on in the first place, and was better able to mediate that situation with those community partners, because the culture of the school was to humanize those children and to really get to, not just focusing on the behavior, but also focusing on the mindset, focusing on understanding the experiences that brought on this particular behavior, and really working to address that, in addition to the disciplinary stuff, right? And so that's where, culture is really, really strong in these partnerships and making them very impactful for the students, because had it just been a disciplinary intervention, there's no guarantee that the problem gets fixed, gets addressed. The problem maybe spills out into the community versus being contained to the school. And the biggest thing is that the young people involved they would not have understood how much the adults care and really want to understand their experiences, right? And so that's when you start to see some changes and some shifts. And my experiences with school is when these young people really get it, that the adults really get them. The adults care about what's going on. And we have folks who are inside and outside of the school that they can lean on for support in these types of situations. And that can make all the difference for young people.
Thank you for sharing those experiences. I think they're very helpful for folks to really contextualize the conversation. We're now at the point where we're going to talk about recommendations and advice. So we work with a lot of teacher educators who are preparing future teacher candidates. Ira, you talked a little bit about some of the things you're doing or you have done in past experiences to prepare undergrads. So now we're talking teacher candidates. What advice, what recommendations do y'all have for educators, teacher educators who are seeking to use an ecosystems approach as they prepare our teacher candidates?
I think the first thing that we really need to do is to really identify our stakeholders in our community. And we also need to build relationships within our communities. And we do that by really engaging our parents. I'm a big advocate of parental support when it comes to making sure that our young people are growing, that our young people are learning. And I think it starts at home. And how does that actually play out? Well, it play out by making sure that we invite our parents into our schools. Or it plays out where even if our parents cannot come in, we meet them. And that's the way in which we really build this system, because our children first teachers, and we know this, is our parents, right? Our parents are the one that set the tone. Our parents are the one that sets the culture. And so we really need to make sure that we are very intentional and authentic in regards to engaging our parents. And from there, I believe it's stair steps. Our parents are involved, and then now we identify our stakeholders are involved, then our community agencies are involved, and from there we are really building this ecosystem. And to leverage out that really takes effort and it takes hard work, but it's worth it as well.
And I think we have to keep navigating. One of the biggest things that I say this year that is on my platform is that kids need more, right? And that more comes from a lot of different agencies that we're talking about here, and a lot of different partnerships that we're talking about here. And what our community has to do is come together to create what that looks like. And that's what Russell is really hitting on. When we come together and discuss openly, right? And there's a lot of pieces that we don't discuss openly, but if we're coming to create an ecosystem and we're coming to create this approach where we all are on the same playing field, we have to be open about what we need. We have to be open about the stressors in our community. We have to be open about what our community does have and what our community doesn't have. And I think what was a really huge part of what Dr. Murray was saying was, and really made me, as a person who was always trying to get better, I started jotting down some notes, right? So coming to sessions like this, being here and taking notes, being open to all ideas, having that growth mindset around what can be done to make my school, or to make the culture of my school, or even for me, if all I can do is control what happens in my classroom, how do I make my classroom the culture that I want to see in my school? How do I make community partners come into my classroom, and then hopefully it spills over into my school community? And so I wrote a bunch of notes around, oh, I need to get a social worker here. I need to I need to add some more career preparation for my 8th graders, and bring in my high school students. So the wheels are turning, but it's being open to have these conversations, and it's being open to being honest. And that whole concept of failing forward is something that has to be embraced, and that you have to be able to say, I'm going to keep moving because this is going to be best for my students, and my students need more.
Mr. Rountree, I hear soliciting feedback, right? So we have to solicit that feedback. And sometimes that feedback is not encouraging. And I love Mr. Rountree that, failing forward, right? So we have to make sure that there will be some times where we will not do well and we will fail, but we have to reflect upon that. And that's soliciting that feedback in order for us to grow. No, we can't grow in safe spaces. My opinion is that we always grow when we are uncomfortable and when we are not doing as well as we should. And that's where the growth comes from. And that's how we really involve our agencies to really help us with that.
Yeah, that's spot on. I mean, I think about the concept of failure as feedback, right? And just what do you get from failure? Like, what do you learn? Some people don't have a concept of failure. Failure is when you don't learn anything, or failure is when there's nothing that you can take from that situation. But if there's something you can take from it to get better, is it really a failure, right? Or is it a setback? Is it something temporary? Right? Failure is permanent. So I agree with all that 100%. I think for teacher education and preparation programs, I think community immersion components of teacher preparation have been shown to be pretty effective in terms of helping future teachers develop a practice of how do they come to understand the environment in which students are living and going to school, the cultural context, the historical context, the economic context, et cetera, is really important, right? And whether that teacher is going to, go on to teach in that particular community where their teacher prep program is, or to another, the point is to kind of help them develop the skills to be able to be a part of that community, because the school really is just a component of a community. And even the learning and the education process is really a community venture, not just a school venture in high functioning areas, right? And so how do we understand what that context is, how we prepare teachers to be best prepared for those contexts? Understanding that content knowledge is not enough. A lot of teacher preparation programs focus on content knowledge, right? And then maybe secondary to that, there's some pedagogy, right? But that's just not enough, right? For educators, my mom was an educator. She was an English teacher for over 30 years. And she understood because of where she taught. She lived in that community. So she understood the lives that her children were living, what they were experiencing. She knew their families. She knew stuff as simple as the route they had to take to get to school, right? And for some kids, depending on what kind of neighborhood you're in or community you're in, the route to get to school, can be dangerous. And just showing up to school every day is an accomplishment, right? And they may spend the entire day dreading the walk home, depending on what that route is, right? And so being able to understand those types of things as a teacher is really crucial. And I wrote down, I think, 4 questions I think that are really important to ask. One is, are we engaging the right stakeholders with the right students at the right time in their lives? Another one is, where are the opportunity gaps that my students are experiencing, or that students in this community I'm going to be teaching and are experiencing, and are we engaging the right people to help fill those gaps? Number 3 is, what are young people saying they need, and how does that compare to what we're delivering? And then last, what are the macro influences at play, and how do we position ourselves as a community to address them. I think when future teachers, are posed with those types of questions, it helps the practice better because it really helps them think about the broader ecological context.
Dr. Murray, I appreciate your comment about emerging the teacher candidate into community. And that's one thing that we do here in Oberlin. One of our interviews, can I say question, is not necessarily a question, it's a visit in our community to make sure if it's a good fit for you or not, right? And so we take our candidates into the community, past our churches, our neighborhoods, to make sure that this is a place where you would like to spend your time in. And I think that's so important. That's things that all of us could do, is to emerge our candidates into our communities.
And I think to add to that, I'm fortunate, just like your mom, I live in the community that I serve, right? I live 4 blocks away. So I know everything that happened in the neighborhood. I know when it happens, what time it happened, who it happened to, right? So I have my ear to the street, and it's really helpful to not only for my community, but also when I'm trying to relate to my students, right? I have a lot of relatable avenues that I can take with my students. And I think that's important for teachers to be able to have that kind of piece and avenue and to have that to add to their toolbox so that they can address kids in the right way. The other piece, though, that I want to make sure that we come back to is that we do this during interviews. We ask, what have you done as a teacher, as an educator? What have you done in the past? How have you connected with the community in the past? But when an individual is hired, the question should be, what could you bring to this community? What other community partnerships have you worked with that would work well with this community? And how does it play into what your role will be when you come to the school community and when you are adapting to this culture? And I think we forget about that piece, because I know that when I first came here, that was the first thing I thought about. What could I do for the community that I'm going to be serving, and what partnerships that I already have that will also serve this community and be a really big pillar for the way that the culture will shift in my classroom.
Gentlemen, we could probably go for a round 2, but time is not with us on this. So I just want to thank you all for your time, for your wisdom, for your reflections. I know the chat was lit up the entire time because folks were really, your comments, your ideas were resonating, and people were eager to hear more. So I'm sure they can follow you on your social media to learn more about the work you're doing and to keep up with all that research, Dr. Murray, that you shared with us. So thank you very much for your time. For our audience members, please do connect with us on social media. We would love to learn more about you and to share our events. We would love for you to attend our next webinar, which is happening next month. And you can learn more about that on our social media and on our website. You can also click on that QR code now if you'd like to register for the next webinar in this series, which is going to be on October 4th. It's always the first Wednesday of the month from 12 to 1 Central Time, 1 to 2 Eastern Time. We are really excited to talk about the community learning exchange, the alchemy of building the nuts and bolts of engagement. So please register, come. We would love to see you there. And you can always find more resources on our resource portal and on our website. We just thank everyone for coming by today. And gentlemen, from learning from you, from hearing this discussion, I know it encouraged me. I have a lot of notes. Failing forward is one I'm very eager to think more about. And also always just putting the child first. That really shone through all of this, is thinking about the child at the center of the ecosystem and the culture that surrounds that ecosystem. So thank you all so much for your time. Everyone enjoy. I want to give a little buffer time so people can transition to their next part of the day, but thank you so much. Have a great day, and please fill out this poll for us before you leave for our audience members. It just helps us as we continue planning our Nuts and Bolts webinars. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.